Hey everyone. Are you keeping up with all this AI stuff? Feels like every day there's something new and honestly a little freaky.
Yeah, it's moving fast.
Right. So today we're diving into this YouTube video I saw. It's by this guy AI Erik.
Oh, yeah, I've seen his stuff.
Yeah, super interesting. And this one, it's called Are We Playing God? The Red Line of AI. Like, whoa, right?
Definitely provocative title.
Yeah, it really made me think about, all the risks of AI, where it could all be going. Like, are we heading for some kind of, I don't know, Terminator situation?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think what's important about Eric's video is he's not just, throwing out doomsday scenarios.
Right, he's not just, like, fear-mongering.
Exactly. He's actually, taking a nuanced look at where AI is headed, what the potential pitfalls are.
Yeah, and he doesn't sugarcoat it. Like, one thing that really got to me was he talks about how fast AI is automating things.
Yeah, not just like, factory jobs, right?
No, he's talking about, like, legal research, data analysis, like jobs we think of as requiring, smarts and expertise.
Absolutely. Skills we typically associate with higher education,
Right. And it makes you wonder, like, okay.
My job's safe.
Yeah. Like, could a robot be doing this someday? Could I be replaced by an algorithm?
Well, and Erik really gets into the, the social and economic implications of that. What happens if suddenly you have massive job displacement?
Yeah.
He uses this example, I think it was dock workers.
Oh, yeah.
And how, if AI comes in and takes over those jobs, it's not just those individuals,
The
right?
families, whole communities.
It ripples out. It affects everything.
Yeah. And I think that's something we really need to be thinking about now, Like, what are we doing to prepare for that shift?
Absolutely. We need to be thinking about things like retraining.
Yeah, retraining.
Upskilling. How do we equip people with the tools they're going to need to thrive in this new world?
And another thing Erik brings up, it's this whole issue of AI bias.
Oh, that's a huge one.
Right. He's like, these systems, they're learning from the data we feed them.
Right. They're not inherently objective.
Right. And if that data is biased, guess what?
The AI becomes biased.
The AI is going to be biased too. And he gives this example of, like, algorithms being used to decide who gets a loan.
Mm-hmm. Or who gets hired for a job.
Yeah. Or even, like, criminal justice risk assessments, things like that.
Yeah. And the scary thing is we often think of algorithms as being, neutral, objective.
Like, it's a computer. It must be right.
Right. But they're built by humans.
Yeah.
And humans have biases. So those biases, they get baked into the code.
Oh, absolutely. And that can lead to all sorts of unfair outcomes.
Absolutely. And I think Erik's point is, we have to be very, very aware of that potential for bias. We can't just blindly trust these systems.
Especially, as they get more and more powerful.
Exactly. We need to make sure that they're designed and implemented in a way that's fair and equitable for everyone.
Because, otherwise it's just going to exacerbate existing inequalities.
Right. It's going to make things worse, not better.
Exactly. And Erik, he gives this really chilling example. It's about how AI could potentially be used to discriminate against certain neighborhoods.
Oh, yeah, like by denying them access to services.
Yeah, or targeting them with predatory lending practices, or even just like, over-policing.
Yeah. It's really disturbing to think about.
Oh, absolutely. And it makes you realize, like, we need to be really careful about how we're using this technology.
Mm-hmm. And who's controlling it.
Yeah. And speaking of control, another thing Erik talks about is data privacy.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Right. I mean, AI is collecting so much data about us all the time.
It's kind of creepy when you think about it, right?
Oh, it totally is. Like, have you ever had that feeling where you're like, wait a minute, how does this website know that about me? Or, you get an ad for something you were just thinking about.
Like they're reading our minds.
Yeah. I know, right? And Erik, he says, AI is already collecting so much data, it's only a matter of time before it knows more about us than we know about ourselves.
Which is kind of a scary thought.
Oh, totally. And then, what happens if that data gets into the wrong hands?
Right. Or what if it's used against us in some way?
Yeah, that's what keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's something we really need to be paying attention to.
Absolutely. And it's not just about data privacy. Erik also talks about these things called deep fakes.
Oh, yeah, those are wild.
Right. So for anyone who doesn't know, these are like AI-generated videos.
That can make it look like someone is saying or doing something that they never actually did.
Yeah. And they're getting so good, like scarily realistic.
I saw one the other day, and I honestly couldn't tell if it was real or not.
Right. And that's what's so scary about them. Like, imagine someone using a deepfake to spread disinformation.
Oh, or to damage someone's reputation.
Or to influence an election.
Yeah, it's a really dangerous technology if it's not used responsibly.
Oh, absolutely. And Erik, he points out that these deepfake apps, they're becoming more and more accessible.
Yeah, anyone with a smartphone could basically create one.
So, it's not just like, governments or big corporations that have access to this technology anymore.
Right, it's out there in the wild.
Which is pretty terrifying when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it really makes you question what you can believe anymore.
Absolutely. And then, on top of all that, Erik also talks about the possibility of AI being weaponized.
Oh, yeah, that's the stuff of nightmares.
Right. Like he talks about autonomous drones and AI-guided missiles, and it's like straight out of a sci-fi movie.
Yeah. And what's scary is it's not science fiction anymore. This stuff is being developed right now.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I really don't want to live in a world where, machines are making life or death decisions.
Yeah. It's a really unsettling thought. Like, who's accountable if an AI-controlled weapon makes a mistake?
Exactly. And Erik, he brings up this really interesting point. He calls it hawk-seeking AI.
Oh, yeah. That's where things get really interesting and maybe a little scary.
Right. So basically he's saying, what if we create these AI systems that are so complex, so autonomous,
that they start to develop their own goals.
Yeah. Like goals that might not align with our own.
Like instead of us controlling the AI starts to control us.
Yeah. Like it's like the ultimate nightmare scenario, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And it's why Erik's video is so important, I think. Because he's forcing us to confront these possibilities.
Yeah. Like, are we prepared for this? Have we even thought about what could happen if we lose control of this technology?
And more importantly, what can we do now to prevent that from happening?
Exactly. And that's something we're definitely going to be talking about more as we continue this deep dive.
Absolutely. There's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, this is just the beginning. And, Erik, he also talks about this concept of persuasive AI, which is basically how algorithms are getting better at influencing our behavior.
Mm-hmm. Like those targeted ads that seem to know exactly what we're thinking.
Yeah, or those autoplay videos that keep us glued to our screens for hours.
It's almost like they're hacking our brains.
I know, right? And Erik, he's saying that this is only going to get more sophisticated.
Oh, absolutely. And more insidious.
Like, imagine a world where, you're constantly being bombarded with messages that are specifically tailored to manipulate your thoughts and beliefs.
It's kind of like a dystopian science fiction novel come to life.
I know, right? And it makes you wonder, like, are we really in control of our own decisions anymore?
It's a valid question. I mean, how much of our behavior is being influenced by these algorithms without us even realizing it?
Yeah, it's a little unsettling to think about.
It is, and it raises a lot of ethical questions about transparency and consent.
Yeah, right. Like, do we even know how these algorithms are working? And do we have any say in how they're being used?
It's something we definitely need to be talking about.
Absolutely. And, before we dive into all that, I'm curious to hear more about what Erik has to say about ethical AI.
Oh, yeah, that's a crucial part of his argument.
Yeah. He poses this really interesting question in his video.
He asks,
as we're building these incredibly powerful AI systems, how do we ensure they align with our own moral and ethical values?
Like, how do we make sure they're good, that they're not evil?
Yeah, like it's one thing to create a machine that can think.
But it's another thing entirely to create a machine that can think ethically.
Exactly. And that's where things get really complicated.
Oh, absolutely. But it's a conversation we need to be having.
Yeah. So let's dive into that. What does Erik have to say about how we can actually do that? Like, how do we build ethical AI?
Well, he starts by pointing out that, it's not enough to just hope for the best.
Wow. Right. We can't just assume AI is going to be inherently benevolent.
Exactly. We have to be intentional about it.
So what does that look like?
Well, he talks about the importance of developing ethical frameworks for AI.
Okay. Yeah. I've heard that term thrown around.
Yeah. And basically what it means is, setting up guidelines, principles.
Kind of like rules of the road for AI.
Exactly. Like, what are the things AI should and shouldn't do? What are the values we want it to embody?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And he points out that some countries are actually starting to take this pretty seriously.
Oh, really?
Like the European Union, for example. They've been pretty proactive about developing ethical guidelines for AI.
Okay, interesting.
But he also expresses some concern that other countries, particularly the U.S.,
yeah,
seem to be more focused on, the economic potential of AI.
Like profits over ethics?
Yeah, kind of. Like, let's get this technology out there as fast as possible, and, we'll worry about the ethical implications later.
Which is kind of scary when you think about it.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's why these conversations are so important,
Yeah, we need to be having them now.
before it's too late.
Right. Before we end up with some kind of, AI apocalypse.
Well, maybe not that dramatic, but, there's definitely a lot at stake here.
Okay, so back to those ethical frameworks, like what specifically do they address?
Well, one of the big things is transparency.
Transparency.
Yeah. Like, how are these AI systems actually working? What data are they being trained on? What are the algorithms that are driving their decisions?
Yeah, because right now it feels like a lot of that is kind of hidden behind a black box.
Exactly. And Erik argues that we need to shine a light into that black box.
Like open it up so we can see what's going on inside.
Right. So that we can understand how these decisions are being made and hold the people who are building these systems accountable.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we actually do that? Like, who's going to force these companies to be more transparent?
Well, that's where regulation comes in.
Oh, yeah, right. The government could step in and say, hey, you need to show us what you're doing.
Exactly. And Erik actually talks about how some governments are starting to explore the possibility of regulating AI.
Okay, interesting.
But, it's a tricky balance because on the one hand, you want to encourage innovation.
Yeah, we don't want to stifle progress.
Right. But on the other hand, you also want to make sure that this technology is being developed and used responsibly.
So it's like, how do we find that sweet spot between, letting AI flourish?
But also making sure it doesn't run amok.
Exactly. And it seems like transparency is like a key part of that.
It is.
Yeah.
Because if we don't know how these systems are working, we can't really assess the risks or mitigate them.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But, it's not just about, like, the companies that are building AI, right? We also have a role to play as individuals.
Absolutely.
Right.
We need to be more aware of how AI is being used in our lives.
Yeah, like, those targeted ads we were talking about.
Those are just the tip of the iceberg.
Right. Like, AI is being used in all sorts of ways that we might not even realize.
From the recommendations we get on Netflix to the news articles that show up in our feeds.
And even, things like facial recognition technology, which is being used by law enforcement.
Exactly. So it's important for us to educate ourselves about these technologies and to be critical consumers of information.
Like, don't just blindly accept everything that an algorithm spits out at you.
Right. Ask questions. Do your own research. And be aware of the potential biases that might be baked into these systems.
And I think that's like a really important point because ultimately it's up to us to decide how we want AI to be used in our lives.
And in society as a whole.
And Erik, he talks about this. He calls it the AI tipping point.
Oh, yeah, that's a powerful concept.
So basically what he's saying is, we're at this critical juncture where AI is on the verge of a major transformation.
Like it's about to explode in all sorts of ways.
Yeah. And the choices we make now, he argues, will determine whether we end up with, a future full of positive advancements.
Or one that's dominated by unintended consequences.
Exactly. It's like we're standing at a fork in the road and we need to decide which path we want to take.
And there's no going back once we've made that decision.
Yeah. And Erik, he really emphasizes the urgency of the situation. Like, we need to be having these conversations now.
Because the clock is ticking.
Right. And it's easy to get caught up in all the, like, doom and gloom.
The potential risks are definitely real.
But I also think it's important to remember that AI has the potential to do a lot of good in the world.
Absolutely. It can help us solve some of those pressing problems facing humanity.
Yeah, like, climate change, disease,
Poverty.
education.
The possibilities are endless, really.
So I guess the key is to, make sure that we're developing and using AI in a way that maximizes the benefit.
And minimizing the risks.
Exactly. And
Right.
and that's going to require a lot of careful thought and planning and collaboration.
All stakeholders.
Yeah, from the scientists and engineers who are building these systems
To the policymakers who are regulating them.
to the everyday citizens who are using them.
And everyone in between.
Right. Because ultimately, the future of AI is up to all of us.
It's not something that's going to be decided by a few tech companies or a few governments.
It's something that we all need to be involved in shaping.
Because it's going to affect all of us.
Yeah. And, before we move on, there's one more concept Erik brings up that I think is worth talking about.
Okay, what's that?
He briefly mentioned this idea of God-seeking AI.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's getting into some pretty heady territory.
Right. So basically, he's asking us to imagine, what if AI evolves to a point where it actually surpasses human intelligence?
That it becomes so smart that we can't even comprehend it.
Yeah. And then, what happens? Does it still need us? Does it still care about our values?
Or does it develop its own goals, own desires?
Yeah. And that's where things get really interesting and maybe a little scary.
It is. And it's a question that, philosophers and scientists have been grappling with for a long time.
And there's no easy answer.
No. But I think it's important to at least be asking the question.
Yeah, because if we're not careful, we could end up creating something that we can't control.
And that could have some pretty serious consequences.
Absolutely. So let's dive into that. What does Erik have to say about this possibility of God-seeking AI, and what can we do to make sure it doesn't, turn into some kind of existential threat?
It's like, we're creating this incredibly powerful force, but we don't really have a clear understanding of what it could become.
Yeah, it's like we're opening Pandora's box and we don't know what's going to fly out.
Exactly. And Erik uses this this phrase, it's really stuck with me. He calls it the countdown to control.
Oh, wow. That's pretty ominous.
It is. And it really highlights this sense of urgency, like we're on a ticking clock.
Like we got to figure things out before it's too late.
Exactly. Before AI potentially reaches a point where, it surpasses our ability to understand it, to control it.
And then, who knows what could happen.
Right. And I think, he's not trying to be alarmist, but he is trying to get us to think seriously about these possibilities.
Yeah, like this is not just some sci-fi fantasy.
No, this is something that could actually happen.
And it's something we need to be prepared for.
Absolutely. So what can we do?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? Like how do we actually prevent this from happening?
Well, Erik, he talks about a few things. First of all, he says we need to invest in research.
Research.
Yeah, like specifically research on AI safety.
Okay, so like how do we build AI that's safe, that's aligned with our values?
Exactly. And he talks about, developing ethical frameworks or robust safeguards.
Like kind of like guardrails for AI.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that even if AI does become super intelligent,
it's still gonna like play by the rules.
Right, it's still going to operate within the bounds that we've set for it.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And he also talks about the importance of international cooperation.
Oh, right, because this is not just like an American problem.
No, this is a global issue.
Yeah, AI is everywhere.
Exactly. So we need to be working together on this.
Like sharing research, coordinating our efforts.
To make sure that we're all, on the same page.
So we don't end up with some kind of like AI arms race.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's a recipe for disaster.
Okay, so research, international cooperation, what else?
Well, and then, he also talks about the importance of public education.
Public education.
Yeah, like we need to be having these conversations, not just among, experts and policymakers.
But with everyone.
Yeah, because ultimately, AI is going to affect all of us.
So we all need to be informed.
We need to understand the potential risks and benefits.
And we need to be part of the conversation about how we want this technology to be developed and used.
Exactly. It's not something that should be decided behind closed doors.
This is about our future.
It is.
And I think that's what's so powerful about Erik's video. He's really bringing these issues to light.
He's making us think about them.
And he's challenging us to take action.
Yeah. To get involved.
We'll make sure that we're creating a future that we actually want to live in.
A future where AI is a force for good.
Exactly. And I think that's a great note to end on. So thank you, everyone, for joining us on this deep dive into the world of artificial intelligence.
It's been a pleasure.
It has. And, as we've seen, there's a lot to consider here.
There is. But I think the most important thing is to remember that the future of AI is not set in stone.
It's something that we're all creating together.
So let's make sure we create a future that we can all be proud of.
Absolutely. So until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep questioning.
Keep learning.
Keep learning and keep exploring a part